usually our brain enters into a calm state. When we're on our device, it's very hard to achieve that state because we're constantly getting excited to click somewhere else, or we're being encouraged to do so. We all have screen time in our day, and the hope is that when I choose some downtime, that I choose a book. And why might I choose a book? Because that's been modeled to me. Of course, we know that AI is a part of today's world. It can often be a great starting point for our research. It is helping us to generate ideas. Where do we want to go for this? What am I trying to discover? But we also know that that might be a starting point, but not the end point. But once we activate our background knowledge, once we consider the depth of the meaning of the words, and we can start to put all those pieces together, understanding how the sentences are constructed to communicate with us, the reader, we're co-authoring meaning with the writer. We're putting all the pieces together to have the writer's perspective along with ours.
This is the Voices of Learning podcast with AISB. Conversations around the skills and mindsets shaping the next generation. Welcome to the Voices of Learning. I'm your host, Magdalen Gray, and today we're diving into literacy. You've probably heard the buzz around the science of reading, and we're definitely going to touch on that, but science is only half of the story. And today we also want to highlight the heart of reading and why our personal relationship with reading is the ultimate superpower for a future-ready world. So joining us today is our elementary literacy coach, Heather Macmichael. Heather brings 20 years of international experience, having worked and taught in Japan, Vietnam, and here at AISB. As an expert in literacy and a dedicated lifelong learner with a background in educational technology, she's passionate about research-based practices. And perhaps most importantly, she's a parent to 2 boys who share her love for books, giving her a unique perspective on raising readers in today's digital world. Heather, welcome.
Thank you, Magda.
So from our last podcast, Heather Corey Top posed a question for you to tie the themes together. And we were talking about around personal purpose and meaning. He asks if you could share a core passion that fuels your work and maybe provides you with a sense of purpose.
So there is a beautiful children's book called Miss Rumphius by Barbara Cooney. And in that book, the character, Alice, when she's young, her grandfather gives her 3 things to do. The last being to make the world a more beautiful place. And I think that for me, literacy is something that can help open doors for kids to help them be able to see the world from a chair, to explore different perspectives so that they can make choices in their learning, choices about how they learn, when they learn, where they learn, why they learn, so that they can ultimately have agency in how they contribute to the world.
Wow. And that drives you. That's a book that drives you in what you do and gives you a sense of purpose. Could you remind us the name of the book again?
Miss Rumphius.
Miss Rumphius. Well, thank you. That's a great question. We'll be asking one from you later for our next guest. Thank you. So moving on to the topic that we've got, literacy and how literacy applies to a world that we would like to be ready for now and in the future. Our first question is around the concept that reading is thinking. So that's something that we say here, and you often hear around conversations around literacy and growing literacy. How has the definition of literacy moved on beyond just decoding words?
It's very helpful to think about one of the reading frameworks that's often referenced, and it's called Scarborough's reading rope. So if you can imagine a rope with the threads woven together, tightly wound, if we think about unwinding those threads, there's kind of 2 main areas that we consider. The bottom strand being word recognition, and that is what we think about, the decoding, understanding how we match the visual symbol of letters to the sounds, to the phonemes. Also understanding how morphemes work together to build words. And that's the decoding part of reading. That is not innate. That needs to be explicitly taught and learned. So there are a lot of foundational skills that go into that strand for word recognition. However, that's only part of the story. The top strand is language comprehension. And with language comprehension, that includes background knowledge, vocabulary, syntax, verbal reasoning. And a lot of that can be developed even from birth, whether we're having conversations, storytelling, songs, because that's comprehending language comprehension strand. And that is where the thinking is really taking place. If we have both strands working together, that's where we can have deep comprehension and deep understanding of a text. And with that, it's reading is thinking. If we are just decoding and saying the sounds, that's exactly all that's happening. We're making sound. But once we activate our background knowledge, once we consider the depth of the meaning of the words, and we can start to put all those pieces together, understanding how the sentences are constructed to communicate with us, the reader, we're co-authoring meaning with the writer. We're putting all the pieces together to have the writer's perspective along with ours. And we have to think to make that happen. So both strands are very much important. And when we can fluently do them together, the outcome is a deep understanding or deep comprehension.
So decoding and comprehension need to work in harmony with each other for the deep comprehension to take place. And so you talked about the decoding or the understanding we make of words and how we add our co-authoring. And that's also by adding our viewpoint or our context when we're reading, and that's obviously built up in our growth from childhood as a human being in this world, and our perspectives on things, and connects very well with how we form a critical judgment on what we're reading. And I wonder, because that's obviously something that we think about a lot as educators, and I know parents are also looking at that as we're looking at the sort of unpredictability of information that we consume, and how does strong literacy foundation help a child develop critical judgment skills or conflict intelligence? So understanding, bringing that soul, that heart of reading into a filter, a kind of method with what we're looking at, when particularly online.
As we know, there is so much text coming at us all of the time, and it's not curated as it was for us in the past. It's not necessarily being all reviewed prior to it meeting our eyes, or we don't have the library curating a collection for us when we're accessing all the information online.
Or it may not mean the best for us. It may not be in our best interests.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about that critical judgment, we want the students to not only think about, is this true or not? That is important. And to do that, we want them to think about lateral reading. So we think about lateral reading in terms of, what is it that I've just read on this site or in this book, perhaps, but then I should step away from this source and perhaps view another source to see what other perspectives are there, what other information exists for this topic or this idea. So we call that lateral reading. And for students to understand the value of that builds that critical judgment. So not just, am I fact checking to see, is it true? Of course, we know that AI is a part of today's world. Mm-hmm. And it can often be a great starting point for our research. It is helping us to generate ideas. Where do we want to go for this? What am I trying to discover? But we also know that might be a starting point, but not the end point. We want to then laterally read to find out more and go deeper into certain areas.
So I'm sort of thinking of a tunnel that you're sent down where there's only one exit, and it's almost preventing us from being in that tunnel where we're being controlled into a certain direction and trying to go about a topic where we can step either way and see what's either side of that tunnel, and maybe we go over the hill, or we do. I mean, there's plenty of analogies, I'm sure, but it's that lateral concept is really helpful, I think, in ensuring and teaching that to children as well. I think quite early is ensuring that this isn't the one truth just
Right.
because it's on a screen, and having that critical thinking as a key lens in.
Even at an early age, we try to help, obviously give a visual landmark to help students. And if you think about a stool is not stable with one leg.
Right.
So if you only have one source, your argument is not as stable. With two, you're getting there, but you're still quite a wobbly stool. And if you move to three, then you have a more substantiated argument, or you fact checked.
Right.
So it's a nice visual to kind of anchor to that we start at a very early age, even in elementary, so that they can think about that idea of lateral reading
Right.
in a way that they can digest.
How do children take that concept out of interest?
They respond very well in the sense that they know that, oh, I gave you, or I found one piece of evidence, but I'm looking for three. And so it's nice when you can put a quantity on it for them. And of course, once they kind of mature into the ideas, they also start to not only ask, is it true? And have I gathered enough information from different sources to understand that it's true? But we also want them to think about the next part, which is, how does this make me feel and why? Because authors, of course, are writing with author's bias.
Right.
And we want students to also consider that you are reading from an author. So it's their perspective. What might a different author say on the very same perspective?
That's very important as a check into the impact of that.
I was just going to say, it can be done also at a very early age. If you think of a story that many of us know in many languages, the story of the Three Little Pigs, but you can tell that story from the perspective of the pig or the perspective of the wolf. And that concept of author's bias is tangible at all ages. And what is providing us access to talking about these really big ideas is literature.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So it's beautiful how it's supporting itself, in its development of these concepts that are quite deep, but accessible at all ages.
No. And we're fortunate now in this era that we can really look at the neuroscience behind the impact of teaching in this way and of reading in itself. I wonder if you could just let our parents, our audience, know what that happens in a brain when a child reads a book compared to when a child consumes content on a screen. I know we're all very aware of this, the pros and cons, but maybe from a sort of professional perspective, you could share a little bit more and what the differences might be in how attention and comprehension and empathy are developed with those two different mediums.
I've heard an analogy once that I really loved to think about this. And so if you think about picking up a book, it's like going to a quiet gym for a deep muscle workout. And if you think about reading on a digital device, it's more like going to the chaotic yet exciting amusement park.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
So your brain is feeling stimulated in both scenarios, but you're going to feel that deep muscle workout the next day. It sticks with you a bit more. Whereas you might not really retain the journey, as much of the journey from that overstimulation of the amusement park. And if we think about books versus digital device, It's also important for us to kind of think about technology for the digital device in two areas.
Right.
There's the emissive light readers, which are our phones and tablets and laptop screens. But then there's also the reflective light readers, which are the e-ink readers. And there's differences happening even in those two different digital devices.
Really?
So with the emissive light, where the light is going directly from the screen into our eyes.
So the laptops, the
phones,
mobiles, and
the tablets, that's giving us, the fatigue from the blue light. That is also often a device that has multiple purposes. So there's hyperlinks, there's notifications. Our brain is being encouraged by dopamine response to click somewhere else. But on an e-ink reader, so your Kindle or Kobo, those are designed with a static purpose. Those are designed to also with reflective light. So the light comes from the sides of the screens and still goes down to the page and then is reflected back to your eye as we would do with a regular book. So the experience for your brain and your eyes are different. You don't have the same fatigue. Also, there's no distractions. It's a single purpose, an e-reader.
So you can be more focused, or
Yes.
your body knows, your brain knows to be more focused.
So if you think about the state of your brain, neuroscientists tell us that an e-reader kind of gets the green light. It is much more similar to a book. So when we're reading from a book, usually our brain enters into a calm state. When we're on our device, it's very hard to achieve that state because we're constantly getting excited to click somewhere else, or we're being encouraged to do so.
And we know that might happen, so we're on alert when we can't completely let go into that writing or the book. Mm-hmm.
And what I found really interesting as well, and I think if you consider a book you've read on a digital device versus a paper copy, if you recall a scene or a quote, it's much easier to go back to it if you can flip to a page and you can kind of visualize where that is. Because what the neuroscience shows us is that your brain is actually topographically mapping the page when we have the book in front of us.
Without, like subconsciously, without you being aware that's happening.
Yeah, it's not a conscious practice, but you could remember like, oh, I remember that quote was at the top of a page earlier in the book, or at the bottom quadrant, and it was in the middle of the book. So you've kind of mapped out the story physically with the spatial turning of pages, and as you're helping to benchmark and bookmark kind of events in your brain.
Yet it's very predictable because you know how that's going to happen. So you don't even notice all of those things are happening.
Right, it's just happening.
Yeah.
Whereas on a screen, because of the continuous scroll, you don't have the same landmarks that you have with a book. So your ability to perhaps retain or anchor some of your moments of connection or your moments of aha, you don't have a physical anchor for those moments. So they can be as fleeting as scrolling on a screen.
That's fascinating. And I wondered also, about around the sort of other elements that reading appears in learning, but also within our lives. So, I mean, literacy isn't just in English, and it's not just in reading. It's also within maths and within math problems, within science inquiry. How can we support teachers to support learners, or how can we support parents to support learners in unpacking the different levels of literacy that they'll need to develop in order to thrive?
What we do in the elementary school to help with this is that we really have reading embedded in all of those subject areas so that students and teachers and parents are seeing that reading is a vehicle to accessing and developing background knowledge and deep understanding of a topic. And when we're embedding reading in science, we can think about it has to be much more logical and linear. If you miss a decimal place when you're reading a lab report, then there can be quite a different outcome, right? We also need to help kids recognize text structures. And when we're reading as a scientist, there's likely going to be a lot of cause and effect. What kind of structure is that? If I understand the structure of the text I'm reading, I can spend less time trying to figure out the message and more time putting the information into my clear understanding of the structure. It will help me with recall and retelling, remembering the details, the key details from the text. And if I'm reading as a historian, then I might be trying to do more reading between the lines to look for that bias, that perspective. It might be more of a chronological text. It might be more of a descriptive text structure, and helping kids to recognize different text structures and where I might run into those text structures in different types of disciplines. Then we're helping them recognize that, yes, I'm reading, but reading for different purposes with different texts requires a different skill set. So we really need to hone in those skills in practice. Even in math, reading in math, again, looks different. And then reading to get lost in a story can be another experience altogether. But allowing kids, I think that, our job here at school is to really offer kids a wide range of texts, a wide range of guided experiences, a wide range of opportunities to dig deep and ask the questions and notice the patterns and the trends across disciplinary areas in terms of their skills as readers.
And across those disciplines, they would sort of presumably switch personas, like I'm being a mathematician now, so I need to engage these skills. I'm being a historian. And that might help them to kind of anchor into a slightly different skill set when they're approaching content.
Yes, because otherwise, if we were to consider that reading is reading, it doesn't do it justice. There's actually a lot of very disciplinary, there are a lot of skills that readers need guidance in developing to be able to access their science textbook or their English novel. And helping readers to become aware of those complexities, not just reading is reading. It doesn't matter what I'm reading. If I can read, I can read anything. The hope is yes, that is the ultimate goal. But let us provide you with the experiences and the scaffolds and the structures to understand how different genres are constructed.
Right. So to differentiate the reading skills, and to, I presume, scale that up as they develop. Definitely. As readers as well. I wonder something that is a threat possibly now with a more digital use is reading more in depth and longer for longer amounts of time. What does the research that you've read tell us about the possible consequences when children or adults don't engage in regular reading? So beyond academics, beyond what we know they're doing in school, there's also plenty of evidence that suggests they should be reading outside of school for a certain amount and should be wanting to read. So it should be, how can it affect their thinking, their communication, their lifelong learning if they're not meeting that kind of sweet spot of reading amount?
There's actually some really startling data that says if a child outside of school, let's say, reads only for 1 minute a day, over the course of a year, they're accessing about 8,000 words. If they read for 5 minutes a day, they're accessing 282,000 words. But if we are to set aside and protect time for 20 minutes of reading a day, that number jumps significantly to 1.8 million words a year.
Wow.
And if we just stop to consider those numbers, imagine the amount of vocabulary that a child who reads 20 minutes a day is being exposed to versus a child who's reading 5 or not at all. And if we think about vocabulary being a huge predictor for success in school, then you can see where a big difference can lie.
Wow. So really, really that amount of daily reading matters. And I know it's something schools like ours recommend, but it almost needs to come with the explanation. So parents take that on more seriously, really, as more than just a guidance, but a kind of a need, a nutrient.
Yes. Yeah. It's an essential nutrient.
Yeah. So I wonder now if we can move on to some practical tips that you would give to parents of really the how, because I think that's what we're hoping that this series and that some of the information that we're sharing or that we're talking about can really give parents something to take away and enhance their parenting and enhance the areas, and particularly this one in building literacy. So I know from many of the parents we talk to, they worry about screen time versus book time. And what is that secret that you'd say in raising a lifelong reader in the digital age?
I mean, our reality nowadays is that screens are very much a part of our lives. I think every family needs to think about what boundaries exist for them and work for them in relation to device use and screen time. But it's not just about those boundaries around screen time. It's about protecting that connection that comes when screens are away and you gather for a book. Whether you're gathering to read a book together, before bed, or whether you're gathering around the table during homework to engage in a text with your child because you can see they just don't have anything left in the gas tank for them to access that science textbook on their own. Whatever the text may be, I think it's just remembering the connection that comes from engaging together.
Right.
Together in a book.
And so that takes me to the magic of reading aloud. And what I think many of our parents wonder is, when is that a magic time when does that come to an end? Or why might it be important to still keep reading aloud to a child, even if they can read independently? So say even when they're 10 years old or even in middle school.
So I'll start with the science and then we'll dive into the heart of that. But I think if we come back to the reading rope, the top strand was language comprehension. And those strands don't develop on the same timeline. So we know that kids' ability to comprehend from listening and discussing is more advanced than what they can read themselves until about the age of 13. So if we think about the power of and the magic of the read aloud, they can access more complex vocabulary, more complex plot lines, more complex ideas. There's discussion, there's reflection, and they can see that, wow, I can really think at a higher level when this is a conversation, when this is an experience that we're having together. And that in itself is motivating. Sometimes if we think about, oh, my child can read, now they're off on their own. They're going to continue reading. And some very well might want that. But the connection, the conversations that you can have, if we think about any time you want to discuss something complex, find a story to be the talking point. If it's grief or personal conflict, or if it's social issues, there's so many beautiful books out there that provide that talking point, that access point to dive in, to explore those complex ideas.
And sometimes easier to ask those questions about somebody else, so the character in the
definitely.
story, than about themselves. And then
For sure.
they're really asking for themselves, but without the pressure.
Yes. And but encouraging them also to see themselves in these stories, to connect with these stories. And that is a beautiful thing of reading. You asked about the empathy piece. And when we enter into another world through a book, we are being encouraged to empathize with another character or to take on a new perspective. And when we're reading with someone else, not just on our own, in a book club as adults, or in a forum online, if that's where the teenagers want to engage and have their conversations, that's becomes a shared experience to talk about more complex or difficult
and hear other perspectives
ideas
as well, because someone might have noticed parts of a book that you haven't, or might have known a little bit more of a background on an area of the book that then helps you fill that picture or read through. Yeah, and that enriches that experience.
And that really is where the heart comes in, right? In the read aloud, the child doesn't have to do the heavy work of decoding that bottom strand of the reading rope. They get to put all of their cognitive energy into the emotional intelligence, into the complexity of the language.
And they can get lost.
They can get lost in it,
because in the story.
Until they become a more fluent decoder, all of their mental energy is going to there. So it's very difficult to be able to show that you have comprehension of a story when you're putting so much effort into the decoding. And if we think about the magic of the read aloud, we want it to be the shared connection, the shared joy, the shared experience. So doing the reading for them allows that richness.
It makes a lot of sense. Another question, sort of as a tip, I think that sometimes parents are wondering is what kind of language can parents use to turn a bedtime story into a conversation that might build that self-awareness? Because as you say, often there'll be room for questions during that read aloud, but how can they maybe use neutral language or open-ended questions rather than just saying, well, actually this means this, this character's feeling this, but how can it turn into that two-way sort of self-growth moment?
Some of the open-ended and neutral statements that are great to use are, I notice, I wonder, to name the emotion that you're seeing. So it seems that this character feels frustrated. What does your body feel when you're frustrated? We want to think about the questioning that we do when we're engaging with a text to be inviting. We talk about open-ended responses. There shouldn't necessarily be a right answer.
Right. That's very important.
So I'm not asking for the recall. It's not a quiz. It's about opening up the conversation, opening up for connection, opening up for question. Something as simple as, what do you notice on this page?
Interesting.
Or, I wonder what would you have done if you were that character?
Interesting. Yeah, I can imagine that going into great personal depth and help. That's really helpful. That we have also some concerns, and I know it's in the headlines that literacy levels are in decline, and that actually reading might be becoming a dying art form. How accurate, from your perspective, are these claims? And do you think children today are engaging with literacy differently or actually less?
Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that reading is dying.
Good.
I do believe that it is shifting and evolving, and it's shifting and evolving at a pace that might feel uncomfortable to some of us. Of course, we want to hold on to our books that we love so much, and we should. You know, we want kids to have that experience as well, because there's magic there, as we talked about. But there's still a lot of reading taking place every day. In fact, we are reading more every day than our ancestors ever were.
Wow.
If we are to think about that. If you think about, there's a lot of visual literacy nowadays as well, but that is literacy, that is reading. Often parents wonder about graphic novels. That is visual as well. But if you dig into, again, the vocabulary in a graphic novel is often quite specific and precise, because we're trying to say a lot in a few words in a frame or a panel. If we think about, book sales are actually up.
Interesting.
Not down.
And that's including e-reader books.
Yes, but also physical books.
Also physical,
there's independent bookstores popping up. So there's Book Talk and Bookstagram and other ways that different generations are engaging with books in a way that suits their style.
Right.
And I wouldn't say that one is right or one is wrong or one is better or one is worse. It is what it is. And if we think about the ultimate goal for kids to see themselves as a reader, to want to read, to feel joy around reading, not that it's a chore, not that it's something that's imposed on them, but something they choose to do because they want to do it, because they see value in it, whether they're having an emotional connection to a character, whether they're having a spark ignited for a new idea to solve a problem, whether they're following a passion. We want them to see the importance and the value in reading. So if we have to let go of some of our traditional values around reading to make space for new ideas or concepts to join our concept of literacy and reading, then I think that we do that. We shift, we evolve, we make space for new ideas to come into our concept of reading.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we should be as agile as the next generation are being with the technology that's available and how people communicate around that.
And I think something that I find interesting as well is, you know, we all, or many of us, spend a lot of time on screens. Mm-hmm. And picking up a book or an e-reader feels like a digital detox from the day. And so, yes, we all have screen time in our day. And the hope is that when I choose some downtime, that I choose a book. And why might I choose a book? Because that's been modeled to me, that when my parents need a digital detox for the day, we have a protected time as a family where we can sit down, and it might look like someone's reading a paper book, someone's reading an e-reader, someone's reading on their screen, possibly for different purposes at different times on different devices. But I think that modeling and creating the space to still value and uphold your family values about reading is something that each family can do what suits their needs.
So parents should be picking up a book when they feel like switching off and making it a very sort of conscious and very seen moment or time. I wonder if you can help with a question I know a lot of parents have is how can students find the right book? I mean, a library like this is so full of fantastic opportunities for reading, and then add online options and what we're being suggested. And then I think parents often worry about what is the just right level, and who they can go to for some personalized guidance. And, rather than a specific book list that's very generic, how can families help their child or choose a book sort of series or books for their child which are meaningful and aligned with their own values?
Well, we're so lucky here at AISB to have two absolutely incredible librarians who really know their collections well and value getting to know their students and families. So if students or families make time to connect with the librarians, they can point them in the right direction. And something for parents to consider as well is, I think one of the traditions that we can do away with, a myth of the past, is the importance to have a just right level.
Okay.
That doesn't really exist if we think about it. If I am new to a topic, then I want to think about my reading as reading up a ladder. So I'm not going to start at the top with the most difficult text. I want to start at the bottom and work my way up. So I might start with a text that's simpler than my just right level to build my background knowledge. But if I know everything there is to know about a topic, I'm going to be able to access a text that might look like it is well beyond what I can decode. But because I have that second strand of the reading rope, I have the background knowledge, I have the vocabulary, I have my verbal reasoning to engage with this text, I will be able to access text that looks out of my league.
And what blows my mind is that strand, that comprehension strand, starts when you sing your child their first nursery rhyme and continues through so many different mediums that wouldn't necessarily occur to us as tools for strengthening reading. That's fascinating. You're listening to the Voices of Learning podcast by the faculty here at AISB. If you like what you're hearing and you're new to international schools or new to AISB, please book a visit and you can connect with us through our admissions office to learn more by emailing admissions@aisb.hu. We've got some quick fire questions that we put together for you, Heather, if you wouldn't mind. And there's 3 of them. The first one is about your own personal reading. So what's a book that made you fall in love with reading and why?
When I think about my young developing years as a reader, the author that comes to mind is Robert Munsch. If I were to choose some of his books, Mud Puddle and Mortimer are books I could still recite word for word to you now. And I think that Robert Munsch was very much a storyteller. And we used to put the cassettes in the tape player and listen to his stories be told. And when I read those books to my children now, I'm hearing his voice in my head still to this day. And so I think that goes with what we were talking about. When does that begin? I was listening to his books long before I was reading myself. And so what were the books I was most excited to pick up as a kid? The books I had memorized by listening to him. Those were some of my first books I was reading. And you got a whole different lens from them, or a whole different experience when you actually read them from when you listened to them, or vice versa. And I still read them now.
That's fantastic.
So that's definitely an author that has influenced me.
Brilliant. And then the literacy myth. What would be one traditional literacy habit that you think we should not stress about?
I think it would be that if I do the reading for my child, they're not learning. Mm-hmm. And if we think about the 7 p.m. meltdown at home, when there's homework to be done, or we have the routine of our child reading to us before bed, but they are just too tired to read that page. They are just too tired to do the heavy lifting of the decoding themselves. then we can share the load with them. We can take that on and we can do the mechanics. We can make the sounds, read the words.
And they're still getting the comprehension, they're still getting the vocab, they're still getting the world that is being shared in that book.
And it's what they need at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that's going to be every day, hopefully. And if it is, then maybe we need to have a different conversation with the teacher or with our child to find out and dig deeper about what might be preventing them from feeling they can access the text themselves. But we can share the load of reading the words with them, and they might be getting more out of it in that sense at that time, in that moment.
Including the relationship with you as well.
Yes.
It's a very special
bond. And that
bond.
can be at all ages. Your 10th grader who says they're going to be up till 1 a.m. because they have to finish this reading, then maybe you can share the load.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And as I say, you're sharing that world with them as well, which is very precious. The older they get, you realize how those moments are incredibly meaningful, and that relationship building as well. So that was a great one. The future. What would be one skill that you hope, with what you know, that every elementary school graduate moving up to 6th grade takes with them into middle school?
We know that when we move up into middle school, the text complexity increases, the volume of what we're expected to read increases, the difficulty increases. So I hope that elementary students are taking up with them stamina for complexity.
Stamina for complexity, right.
So when it is hard, they know that it's okay to slow down. It's okay to reread, to dig deeper, to think about what it is they already know. How is this either conflicting or adding on to their background knowledge? To take time to pause. We're often on this hamster wheel of everything has to happen quickly. But when we're entering into a text with complexity, I hope that they don't give up.
Right.
Or feel that they can't access it, but take the time to say, it's okay that I don't understand this yet. I have the skills I need to pause, reread, consider, evaluate, analyze, and make those connections I need to find my access point into a text.
To me, it sounds like building endurance, Heather.
Yes.
It sounds like what you're talking about as the quiet gym where there's some deep muscle training versus the skimming, and it's building the muscle of endurance. And that sounds like it has huge rewards if there's a focus on that routine from very early on. So many valuable things. And I wondered if, as we close this episode, you had a sum up or one key takeaway of so much information. I know there's lots more that we could talk about, but is there one thing that you as an educator, but also with your hat as a parent, feel that parents could take away from this episode?
I think I would say that reading is not a race to be won, but it's a time for connection.
Thank you so much, Heather. Really appreciate the time you've given and the deep thought that you've put into sharing these ideas with us. I know there's a lot more, and we hope to continue sharing around this topic with our parent community. We know that there's a lot to be gained in co-understanding some of these concepts and developing together as learners. So thank you. Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.
And if you're curious about our literacy program or any of the topics that we've tapped into today, would like to know more, please do reach out to us. Come and visit the school if you'd like to see our library in action, if you'd like to maybe look at what kind of skills, what kind of resources there are for you to grow as a partner in your child's learning. Please do reach out to us. You can email us at info@aisb.hu, and we'd always love to hear how this has landed with you and any other thoughts you have of topics that we could spin off from this that you might be interested in. So thank you very much for listening, for watching. I've been Magdalen Gray, and this has been the Voices of Learning podcast. We look forward very much to seeing and exploring another topic with you in the next episode.